Inland waterways and marshy areas. This type of terrain includes rivers, streams, ponds, lakes, canals, marshes, and bogs. Contrary to general belief, tracking is possible where these circumstances exist. The wetter areas are very difficult to track in, except for shallow or still water where footprints may show up, or when following a very fresh track, where splashes on rocks and vegetation and muddy water will be telltale indications of the quarry's presence. Signs to assist the tracker in these sorts of regions are, see Figure 12. Footprints on the bank where the quarry has entered and exited. Skid, slip, and slide marks on banks. These will show as very distinctive color changes. Footprints in shallow water. The tracker must examine the riverbed looking for color change, being careful to avoid fouling the sign. Stones on riverbeds are covered in a type of sediment. Therefore, when the stone has been trodden on, there is a definite color change. Mud churned up, discoloring the water. Rocks splashed with water in a quiet running stream. This is transfer. Places on the bank where a person has sat down to take his shoes off or put them back on. This results in flattening of the area. Foliage growing over a stream may be disturbed or broken. Entry and exit points are usually obvious and channel the quarry. Therefore, time should be spent looking for these. As can be seen from this list, tracking is possible around inland waterways, but I would like to give a word of warning, especially to the adult with responsibilities for training young people. All waterways are potentially dangerous to the inexperienced, and animals especially can lead the unwary into trouble. Remember, it's quite easy for small animals such as foxes, rabbits, badgers, and birds to walk on top of a bog without sinking, and they can also easily swim across a canal, a pond, a river, or a lake. The seashore. The seashore has many features in common with sandy deserts and also inland waterways. The unique salient feature for the tracker is the effect the tides may have on his task. Although the encroaching sea obscures sign, with the knowledge of the tides, the tracker can on occasion place sign within a specific time bracket. Soft, damp sand will leave a very clear-cut impression, easy to distinguish and follow. It will remain apparently fresh for a considerable time, but dry sand is badly affected by strong winds, as in sandy desert regions. The main points to be considered are as follows. If the surface is inclined to be wet and hard, the footprint is very clear. If the surface is soft, the footprints will be quite deep. In the early morning and late afternoon, the walls of the impression may cast a deep shadow because of the lack of relief and obstructions often characteristic of coastal areas. Snow-covered regions. After a fresh fall of snow, anything that moves across it will leave a patently obvious track. See Figure 13-1. Where the quarry's footprints, in this case human, are clear and easy to follow, probably the tracker's easiest tracking task. The following are some of the distinctive features of tracking through snow. Secondary snowfalls. Even if there is another fall of snow on top of the quarry's sign, under the right conditions you can still follow the track by the shadow under the surface layer, contained shadow, as long as the new snowfall does not get too deep. Figure 13-2. Hardness of the surface. This governs the prominence of the sign. Differences in sign made by the same animal. This phenomenon occurs when, for instance, an animal leaves a recognizable, normal, clear track in snow an inch or two deep that has a hard surface, but in deep, soft snow, the whole appearance of the track will alter. On hard snow, a rabbit's track is easy to identify, but in soft snow, it is very difficult to reconcile the large footprints he makes with his size. Again, animals do not leave a tail mark on hard ground, may leave a very distinctive and initially confusing tail mark in soft, deep snow. I have not included ice-covered regions in this section because the skills required for tracking under such conditions are more akin to those recorded above in the section on rocky ground. Urban and built-up areas. The skills required for tracking in built-up areas are not the sole preserve of the large town or inner city, because the tracker following a quarry through a predominantly rural area may suddenly find himself in a large farm complex, a disused airfield, or some such man-made feature. The significant features of areas such as these are the hard artificial surfaces of which roads and railway lines are made and over which the quarry will move. Fortunately, there is a great deal of commonality between built-up areas and other areas in which the tracker has to practice his skills. For instance, there are many grassed areas and unsurfaced footpaths. Invariably, though, tracking in built-up areas will involve foul tracks and will slow most trackers. However, although slowed to pace tracking, the tracker may speed up his pursuit by carrying out a process of track isolation through the following. Look for exit and entry points. Learning likely areas, see Chapter 16. Presence of particular sign pattern. And a tracker following a track into a built-up area should be aware of the following points about the quarry. He may have a rendezvous with someone. He may be friendly with the local population. He may live in the area. The climate. The student of tracking has to familiarize himself with the effects of the weather and climatic conditions on spoor and sign. The three climatic factors that affect the track are direct sunlight, strong wind, heavy precipitation. All these factors will adversely affect the sign of a track. The degree to which this happens varies and depends upon the strength of the element, whether elements were working in combination or separately, the duration the element impinged on the sign, the type of terrain. Generally speaking, tracks sheltered from direct sunlight, strong wind, and heavy rain will still be recognized days, if not weeks, after they were made. Direct sunlight. This causes sign to return to normal more quickly, although we have already seen how in certain circumstances the presence of sunlight can help the tracker to determine the quarry's direction of movement. A light path indicating movement away, a dark path indicating movement towards. Strong winds. The wind encourages disturbed vegetation to return to its original position. This is particularly true of long grasses and tall cereal crops like corn, wheat, and barley. When a strong wind blows, any grass shoots displaced by the quarry tend to be tugged back up into their original position. In these circumstances, a tracker will primarily be following ground sign, and if you look at the lower part of the grass stem, you will find that it will be broken and pointing in the direction in which the quarry traveled. Strong winds may also conceal ground sign as debris is blown about. For the observant, aware tracker, the effects of the wind can be an advantage. It may have blown dust, dried grass, straws, leaves, or other debris over the marks. This feature, coupled with the observation as to when the weather was windy, will give you a clue as to the time the sign was made. It is this type of detail that is always important, and it is this type of awareness of his surroundings that sets the good tracker apart, for he is continually monitoring significant changes and remembering what has happened. Being aware of your surroundings and the interplay of factors is the reason why any tracker working a woodland area, whether it be jungle or temperate, is always alert to the dangers of deadfalls. Deadfalls are the result of old, dead, or rotten wood suddenly being displaced by the wind or rain. As they come crashing through the smaller, flimsier branches near the ground, the unwary have little time to react. Heavy precipitation. This will wash out some sign very quickly, particularly ground sign, and is probably the tracker's greatest enemy. On the other hand, if there has been only a light shower, spots of rain may have pitted the sign, thus giving the tracker an additional clue as to the time it was made. See chapters 14 and 15 for a full explanation of judging the age of sign and deductive skills. Time. Time is the fourth of the factors that affect sign. To be able to assess the time bracket between when a spoor mark was made and when it is found is one of the crucial tracking skills. Only experience and practice will enable the tracker to judge accurately when sign was made. Out of the four factors affecting sign, time probably poses the greatest challenge to the tracker. The following practical anecdote illustrates what I mean. The owner of a sheep station in Australia was riding with one of his stockmen. They were looking for a flock known to have passed through the area over a week before. The owner saw many tracks, assumed they were made by his flock, and suggested they should follow him. The aboriginal stockman contradicted him, reasoning, "No, these tracks were made only 2 days ago." It would have been easy to be misled by the obvious tracks if the stockman hadn't taken into account all the facts and then applied them to his observations. The following are some of the main indicators of timing. The track in question may cross other tracks for which the timing is known, if, for instance, they are made by humans whom you have identified and whose movements you know, or by animals whose habits you are familiar with. Insects and worms that have worked across the marks can be useful to the locally experienced tracker. The heat retained by the remains of fires, food, and feces, grass and other vegetation that has been bent, will spring into normal place again in a few hours. Broken vegetation will wither and die at set rates depending on the type of plant and the climatic conditions. Observation and the ability to recall changes in the weather will also enable you to assess timings. For example, a boot print with only a very small amount of water in it when it has been raining heavily for several hours would indicate the quarry is very close. Water running back into a boot print on the edge of a puddle also helps to establish the passage of time. The drying rate of soil disturbed and exposed to sunlight. The obliteration rate of sign by strong winds. Knowledge of the characteristics of various soils also helps the tracker to assess the time lapse. Most clay-based soils or earth will keep the impression longer and more distinctly than loamy or sandy soils. To sum up, the tracker must be aware that the 4 factors that affect sign do not influence the track independently of one another. They work in unison on the sign and spoor to weather it and to alter its nature. Sometimes one of the factors becomes dominant, and at other times it is the interplay of the factors that produces the changes in the original sign. Summary. Factors affecting sign. 4 main factors affect sign: spoor and sign left by other animals and vehicles, features of the terrain, climatic conditions, time, third-party spoor and sign. Spoor and sign belong to one of 3 groups: you, the tracker, and your team; the quarry, which can be one or more persons or vehicles; a third party. The terrain. The major types of terrain that offer very distinctive attributes for the tracker: grass and cultivated areas, rocky ground, sandy desert, primary forests, secondary forests and dense undergrowth, inland waterways and marshy areas, the seashore, snow-covered regions, urban and built-up areas. The climate. The 3 climatic factors that affect the track are direct sunlight, strong wind, heavy precipitation. All these factors will adversely affect the sign of a track. The degree this effect will have is varied and depends upon the strength of the element, whether they were working in combination or separately, the duration the element impinged on the sign, the type of terrain. Time. Time is the 4th of the factors that affect sign. To be able to assess the time bracket between when a spoor mark was made and when it is found is one of the crucial tracking skills. Interdependence. The tracker must be aware that the 4 factors that affect sign do not influence the track independently. They work in unison on the sign and spoor to weather it and to change its nature. Sometimes one of the factors becomes dominant, and at other times it is the interplay of the factors that produces the transformations.